Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of our podcast, Discovering the Architecture Middle Path. As usual, Sanjiv is joining me.
Hi, nice to be back.
So, based on some requests, we thought of discuss about the architects as well as the architecture. So the topic for today is role of architect in the enterprise. Since we spoke about different type of elements of the architecture in the past episodes, we thought of mainly focus on the role as well as in general how architecture affecting in the enterprise, because architecture is the most important thing when it comes to building systems. So because of that, we picked the topic. So Sanjiv, why don't you give a quick introduction to the architecture and why it matters in the enterprise?
Sure. So maybe we'll start off outside the enterprise in architecture in the real world. So when you build a house or when you build an office building or build a city or build whatever, you always have architects involved. And there's architecture and there are multiple disciplines. There's structural engineering, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and various forms of construction skill sets. All these people get together to deliver the solution, which is the building or your house or your office or your city or your road or whatever. And architecture is the one that bridges the space from the problem that the customer is trying to solve to the various things you put together to realize the solution. Right? So that's how the real world works. The architect or the architecture company or the architecture team is the one that works with the customer, whatever the customer is, whether it's a homeowner or a building owner or a city owner or a bridge owner, whatever it is, to figure out what are the business needs, what are the problems they're trying to solve, what are the quality characteristics, what is the experience you want to deliver, all of those things, and then work, not just translate that into the diagram, the drawings that we all see when you see architecture drawings, but also take from there to work it all the way down to this is the underlying structural engineering, work with structural engineering to do that. This is the underlying construction materials, and then also see it all the way through. And actually be hands-on all the way through to get it done. And that's really what architecture is, even in the software world.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because in general, there's a misconception about architects that people think they are just drawing diagrams and then creating presentations and operating at that level. Even when I started working as an architect, the job was really boring because of that, because the expectation from the organization was that to get these blueprints done. But fortunately, I had an opportunity to work with a software team in Ireland. And interestingly, one day, the chief architect, he was fixing some bugs. Then I walked to him, asked, what are you doing? And he said, okay, I'm fixing bugs. Then I asked, okay, you are the chief architect. Why you are fixing the bugs? Then he said, okay, without touching the code, how can I build a good architecture? And that was kind of an eye-opener for me, even to look at it from the high level as well as getting to the weeds of this. And I think you and Paul changed that to the next level by having very high-level conversations about architecture discussions, and then getting to the code level and discuss about details. So I think so that's where architects should operate, from the engineering level into the concepts. I think when it comes to the concepts, we spoke about abstracts. So there's a direct link between abstracts and architecture. So probably we can touch based on that as well.
Yeah. And the abstractions are kind of the tools of the architect. When you're solving some problem, you have to abstract the problem in order to be able to think through it. Because if you're, again, I'm going to keep going back to physical architecture because it's easy to relate to. When you try to build a 50-story building, you don't worry in detail about, what's the air conditioning of a single room at that stage. Right? You abstract that away, saying, yeah, there is a problem that will be solved along the way somewhere. And there are various fundamental abstractions that are involved with building anything that are about to start with, or the atoms that you communicate with. And if you don't have those right, you end up in a mess. And yes, you can probably make the thing you're building, whatever the piece of software or whatever it is, you can make it. But then the costs of that development goes up significantly when that architecture is not right. And architecture doesn't become right if you don't do the architecture with the right abstractions. So, and to do the abstractions, as you said, an architect who doesn't understand what is implementable and what is easy to implement versus what is hard to implement can draw pretty pictures, but they're out of touch, basically. It's actually another analogy for that is, there was an era when, as technology, especially software technology companies, started taking off, there was this mindset that you hire, management of the company is done by MBAs. You don't need to know the domain. You hire a business guy and they run it, right? And what we've seen is that has turned around completely. Now, if you look at the leadership of all the major top tech companies, they're all engineers who are leading them. And they're not, they might have picked up an MBA along the way, but their fundamental core thinking, their core training, core is engineering core, technology core. And without that, and of course, the few companies that have survived long term in the tech world, if you look at whether it's Microsoft, Bill Gates was an engineer and he understood stuff, and he's famous for his think weeks. The younger people may not know about these things, but when Bill Gates was very actively running Microsoft, every year he would spend a week where he would collect his leadership team, the technical team would send him material to go and read about what's going on in the tech world. And in that end of that week, he would write a bunch of memos and say, okay, I get all these things. Now this is what we're going to do. Right? Sort of help guide the direction of the business through deep understanding. And that's only possible because he had the deep understanding to go all the way to the bottom. And it's very, very important that architects are people who are hands-on, because if you, in the end, in software, the world comes to real in code. So if you've lost touch with code, you got to regain touch with code.
Yeah. So I think I've been an architect for nearly 2 decades now. This question coming whenever I meet software engineers and people who just started their career as a software engineer, or when I go to events about who's an architect, what's their responsibility. So my immediate response to that, architect is like a knight in the war, like a war field, because you define how the battle is constructed, and then you are in the battle itself and then helping other people to win. So that's how I kind of explain it. So basically, when it comes to enterprise, how you define the technical vision and then aligning the business, right? So this Gregor Hobbs got this nice definition about architect is a person who's riding the elevator, like from the penthouse to the engine room, and connect these dots in between and keep that team together and then direct them in the correct direction on top of the architecture that they define.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. They are the sort of the connecting glue in that entire business, going from business level all the way down to the engine room. And I think it's useful probably to think about sort of architecture in a technology company, say WSO2, versus architecture in a regular company which is using technology to do its business, right? And I always split these two, because a company like WSO2's purpose is to create technology. We, of course, use technology ourselves, and we have a whole team that does internal architecture and internal applications. But then that's not our business. We are in the business of creating technology for other people. Whereas 99% of the business in the world are hopefully actually doing something, not just creating technology for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So when they do something, their architecture is very, very fundamental, because that is what allows them to deliver those awesome, intelligent digital experiences to their customers. And to do that, you need to understand that domain. You need to see all the way from top to bottom, what is the business goal, what is the business problem, why are we doing this, who are we doing this for, when do we have to deliver it, and then work down.
Yeah, that's where like different type of architecture coming, and that creates different kind of architects as well, who will be focusing on different aspect of the architecture. So I think depending on the complexity of the system, depending on the size of the organization, this can vary. But since we are especially speaking about enterprises, then we can categorize them into different architectures, as well as architects starting from business architecture, enterprise architecture, software platform architecture, so on and so forth. But then again, I think the main thing, yes, you need to focus on that specific architecture domain, but there are a lot of cross-cutting things across these different architectures. I think that's another problem that we have seen. These architecture groups are operating as silos. I think to be a good architect, you have to have that kind of a full stack architect knowledge, but you can specialize on one area, but you should have that knowledge about other areas as well to build that enterprise architecture, and then have a connectivity in between these different aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, to take a building analogy, right? If you're building a large, complex building, of course, you don't expect the same person to go through every single part of it and be specialized in architecting every function that's in that system.
Good.
But you have to have some level of understanding across the board, and you need to be able to communicate and interact. This silo behavior is what results in complete disasters, where you have one part of the company thinking and operating in one way and another part operating in another way. And then you don't have any kind of ability to deliver a single unified experience. Because in the end, if I'm a customer of your company, I don't know your internal organization. I don't care about your internal organization. I just want to interact with the company, entire company. And for me to interact with the entire company, you have to pretend at least you're one nice, happy family.
Yeah. I think if you look at these different architecture focus areas, business architecture is something neglected from the technical architecture for a long time. But I think it's really important when it comes to building these large systems, because that's where you identify the requirements, because we spoke about this outside-in approach that give the more preference to what exactly the end user is looking at, and then build the architecture around that. So having the proper business architecture helps to build a proper technical architecture as well, and then take it throughout, and then the end result, bring it, the end results more closer to what exactly the end user is expecting, can be done if we have a proper business architecture.
100% Asanka. If you are a architect in a particular business, first thing is you have to understand the domain. You can't, it's like saying I can't do something, I can't create the best experience, best solution, best underlying infrastructure for something I don't understand. So you have to understand what this business does, who it does it for, why they do it, how they do it, when they do it. All these things you have to have some intuitive understanding, not in detail being able to run the business level, but just intuition about this is what this is all about. Then that allows you to transform the business. When you refer to business architecture, you of course mean the platform that defines a business's digital signature effectively, right? So it's a set of things that represents the entire business digitally. And if you do that, if you get a nice orthogonal basis for that space, then you can create any kind of experience, deliver any kind of product, any kind of capability over any channel. All these things we hear about, like, we're in your omni-channel initiative. All these things become very, very straightforward if you get this right business architecture. So I think, as you said, the business architecture is in fact the most important thing. And then that drives down next level. Eventually, yes, the database architecture matters, but who cares about that if I can't deliver the experiences that I need to deliver to the customer?
Yeah, I think that reminds me about cell-based architecture as well, because with cell-based architecture now you have a foundation to connect these things, because you can start with the domains at the business architecture level, and then application architecture. You can define these cells properly by mapping to the domains, and then it doesn't stop there. When you go and deploy, then you will get the actual cells at the deployment level. So we have kind of a connecting tissue that you can connect all these different architecture styles or architecture focus areas into a single architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key is being able to put all that together, right? Without that, it just doesn't work through. I mean, cell architecture is really a great way to decompose the problem. Cell in many ways is just many years ago, Ann Thomas Maines wrote this thing about microservices and mini services. Mini services were sort of a concept of saying, okay, you need to micro is too small, mini is the right size. Of course, these are just words, right? But in a way, a cell is a higher level abstraction for the organization. So getting again comes down to the abstractions. If the cells are right, if the abstractions are right, you can make anything. Again, human biology, right? We have a few fundamental building units, and you can build awesome variations of people with the same foundational building units, building blocks. So that is what is possible with enterprise architecture if you get it right. It's not easy. That's where the abstractions, getting it right, comes in. That's why it's an art form. It is not everybody's going to be perfect at it. And the ones who are brilliantly good are just incredibly good.
Yeah, and in a previous episode, we spoke about modernization. So again, there's a direct link with the modernization and architecture and architects, because when you are looking at the modernization, you need to look at it from the architecture point of view, and then take the correct decisions, because otherwise you will modernize the system, but it might break everything, and then will not result what exactly the business is looking from the system or the systems that you are building. So there's a bigger role when it comes to modernization with the architecture and the architects as well.
Yeah. Again, modernization is not a destination, right? You don't say, well, I'm now modern, I'm done. The day you say that, you're already old. So to be able to do that, you have to keep on evolving, and getting architecture right is, we've talked previously, Asanka, about this concept of iterative architecture, that an architect is not there to say, okay, this is the picture, that's it, we're done. Right? In that case, you can hire an architect like you will hire somebody to, paint your house once and walk away. But architecture is permanent, and it's iterative. You don't say, okay, I'm done. You do enough to get the thing working. Then you iterate to make it better and better and better, or bigger or smaller, or whatever the right orientation is based on your needs. So modernization is the same thing. So when you modernize, you don't land at your modern architecture today and say, okay, we are now at the modern architecture, let's go implement that. You make an incremental evolutionary change. Say, okay, now you have a vision for where you want to be, and you take milestone at a time. Because you're changing tires and moving truck when you're modernizing a business. So you don't get to stop the world. You don't get to say invest money for 5 years to see outcomes. You don't, you have lots of challenges, and leadership will change, management will change, team members will change. So you have to be on a continuous iteration path in order to deliver on these things.
Yeah. I think with that, I think we can a little bit touch based on the future as well as the current role of architects and the architecture, because as other roles in the enterprise, even architects are a little bit curious about what's going to happen, whether AI will take over the role of architect as well. But I think it's more than that. It's helping the architects a lot. And if you correctly use AI within the enterprise, then you can identify the issues that you have in the current architecture by feeding all this data. And then again, when you are taking new decisions, that can be something that you can use to help on taking correct decisions, more kind of a data-oriented approach rather than based on assumptions.
Yeah, so for me, architecture is a problem-solving skill. It's an absolutely necessary problem-solving component, absolutely necessary component of business growth, business creativity, business execution, everything. So it is never going to go away. Now, it is of course possible that AI in its extreme form will be able to solve problems just as well as we can. It's not quite there yet. Of course, this latest thing from whatever this multi-agent system that this Chinese company has announced sounds really amazing. There's all kinds of things that will keep on coming. But the real value from AI and so forth is really, to me, AI lets a person scale to more than what they can be without AI. However good an architect you are and how many hours of work you put in, if you have 500 services and 1,000 services or things in your business, at a human level, it is impossible to get all that into your context window, into your memory, so you can process it, right? It's just too much information. But a system can do that. And that is the real power that AI will give. So an architect who learns how to use those tools properly will become a lot more capable and powerful architect, because you still have that judgment component, which, if you understand how LLMs work, they are not applying judgment. They're applying previous patterns amazingly well, basically, to solve problems. And judgment is where art comes in. That's why I always think of architecture as a form of, as a kind of artistic discipline. And yes, it is possible to learn art, right? People go and learn art, and there are foundational principles of art that you learn. Don't ask me about art. I can't draw anything to save my life. But there are foundational principles of how art is taught. There are ways in which you learn architecture, and you learn from experience, you learn from various techniques and tactics and so forth. And then by putting that together, you now can be somebody who is always ahead of AI in some sense as well. Because that judgment, where you bring intuition, you bring experience, you bring a thing, say, yeah, this is mathematically correct, but it doesn't feel right. We shouldn't do this. We should do that. That's where great architects separate themselves from good architects.
Yeah, I think architects are visual, right? Like you might not draw a pretty picture, but you will draw a nice technical drawing. And explaining that problem and the solution in a more visual manner is a critical thing for an architect, and then improving that skill also really important. So again, another question a lot of architects are asking, what's the tool that you use to draw diagrams? Again, my answer is, it's not the tool. It's about how you think, and then how you put this diagram together in a way that you can explain it to somebody else.
Absolutely. I mean, the tools are important because it's a question of how long it takes for you to, it's a productivity statement more than anything else. For me, the best tool is still whiteboard. There is nothing that comes, if we can get together, and obviously we're on either side of the world, right? You're in California, I'm in Sri Lanka. So whiteboard is not a tool that's available to us. And now the digital whiteboards have remotely cracked the problem of a gorgeous whiteboard on the wall. But hopefully one day it will, so you can actually be as productive remotely. But the tools are important. Picture drawing is important. Pictures worth 1,000 words. And for human-to-human communication, a picture instantly transforms intuition from one brain to another brain. And that is the value that picture is. So yes, if you are an architect, if you're going to solve problems, you have to learn to think in terms of visually representing what is the problem and what is the solution and what is the approach. So other people can connect to it, instantly, not with reading a 500 words or 1,500 words or whatever. You still need that because precision is important. Pictures may not be as precise, But you need those few pictures to kind of get into the person, get alignment very, very fast. Once you get alignment, you can work on the details to actually get it. But if you're talking at two different planes, it's just not worth bothering even.
Yeah, I think it's a really good starting point if you draw that on a whiteboard and then start or drive the conversation. And we have witnessed this thing, like whenever we meet in California, Colombo or Dubai, and then if we have a whiteboard in front of us, we get done a lot of stuff to a level that we cannot do in a remote meeting like this. Yeah.
And I remember, Asanka, you came up with this concept of level 0, level 1, level 2 pictures, right? Sort of, and we it's a simple thing, but it makes a big difference. Basically, the first time you try to draw a picture, you don't worry about all the details. You draw big boxes. Then you start drilling down. I mean, that originally that was designed in the context of architecting a deployment for the most part, right? Not necessarily architecting a business solution. Now we moved on. Because, with cloud, you don't think about deployment anymore. If you go to Choreo, if you go to any other two things we're going to announce next week, you don't know anything about what's underneath. You don't care. You get the capability. Now the problem for architecture is no longer about, okay, how do I set up the right number of servers in the right way with the right thing? You just say, okay, whatever, that will work. We know that will work. Now, how do I actually solve the business problem? But the concept of a level 0, level 1, level 2 architecture is still very, very important.
Yeah, I think that's addressing a common problem architects are facing as well, because sometimes the diagrams and the architecture that they put together, it's really complex. It's really hard to understand. So I think with this level 0 to level 1 approach, you can simplify it and then step by step bring this different abstractions into the architecture. Actually, we are doing a session about level 0 to level 1 in our conference next week. So if somebody is interested, still there's an opening that you can come and join us at the conference as well. So
yeah, of course. I think we've talked about lots of interesting stuff. Architecture and architects are very, very fundamental to solving anything. I see a lot of companies try to become digital businesses without having depth of architecture in their organization. And to me, it's a tragedy, because I see them going to a vendor or some supplier of some product and asking them to guide that direction. And that's just not going to work. And they are not paying attention to it. They need to take ownership of architecture. And I always have to do a shout out for an article I always talk about. There's an organization called 18F in the US, which is a government consultancy company that wrote a paper about the right way to build solutions, basically. It's focused on large-scale solutions, but it applies even for less large-scale solutions. And one of the main thing is you need to take architecture control into the organization. You cannot outsource architecture control somewhere else. So it starts off at that full enterprise architecture, the full business architecture, actually, and then the enterprise architecture, and then goes down. And then you can get different people to do different parts. So I think the role of an architect in the business is so critical as companies become digital, and especially with AI playing even a more faster facilitation role for becoming digital.
Yeah, I think as always, it was a really good conversation, and we touched very interesting points. To summarize, basically, the architect and the architecture is the glue in between the strategy and the implementation. That's why it's pretty important. So we will speak about this topic in future episodes as well. Maybe focus on different kind of architecture, like business, enterprise, solutions architecture, so on and so forth. So stay tuned, and we will come with a different topic in our next episode. Thank you very much for joining, and hope it was interesting for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.